Premamritam panidhi Akvatur namase samannalapati shaning Sadatu chama Bhuttvadina ganesha karu karnaya Kopina kanthasitau Krishna Kirtana Ganana Tanapano Premamritam Manidhi Dhira Dhira Jana Priyau Priyakarau
Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Ajunulambito Bujo Kanakabhatatu Sankirtanaya Kapitaro Kamalaya Taksho Vishwambaro Dvijabaro Yugadharma Palo Vande Jagat Priyakaro Karunavataro Vande Śrī Kṛṣṇa Chaitanya Nityananda Sahodito Gurudaye Pushpavanto Chitra Sangdo Tamuno Vandeham Śrī Ramakrishna Abhayo Charana Sako Sukado Paramanando Sundaro Subalapriyo He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostude Tapta Kanchana Gurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye.
Shri Gaudiya Vaishnav Guru Parampara Ki Jai, Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī Ki Jai, Sat Sandarbhas Ki Jai, Anantakota Vaishnavinda Ki Jai. Glorious devotees, thank you for attending another presentation on Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī's Śrī Kṛṣṇa Sandarbha. We continue today with a review of a reading from the Fourfold Army of the Paribhasa Sutra. And we're continuing in the second division. The first division dealt with supportive statements or statements from the Srimad Bhagavatam that directly supported the Paribhasa Sutra, kṛṣṇastu Bhagavān svayam. And now Jīva Gosvāmī is proceeding to show that the major dialogues in Srimad Bhagavatam also highlight the significance of the Paribhasa Sutra, in that we can see in the major dialogues that the major subject of the texts of the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Leela narratives presented therein and the various dialogues and the questions of answers are all supportive of and giving direct reference to Krishna as that topmost manifestation of divinity. So, Krishna is the subject of the Bhagavat's major dialogues. Anucchedas 44 through 73, quite an extensive section of the Krishna Sandarbha, dealing with his subject. And then we continue on later in the last two divisions of his Fourfold Army with hermeneutics, or actually the linguistic presentation or scriptural interpretation of the various verses and how those also are supportive, as the divisions of an army are supportive of the king, the Paribhasa Sutra. We continue with the 53rd Anuccheda. Parikshit's intelligence firmly established in the stories of Krishna. Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī writes in this 53rd Anuccheda, this very same thing, Parikshit's mental fixity on Krishna, is understood from the words spoken by Sri Sukha after hearing King Parikshit's request in the 13 verses beginning with 10:1:1, or at the very beginning of the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Jiva quotes a verse from the 15th verse from the beginning of the 10th canto. O best of saintly kings, your intelligence is properly situated because irrevocable love for the stories of Vasudeva has been awoken in you. Jiva paraphrases as follows: although previously you had experienced tremendous delight by my recounting the exploits of various avatars, irrevocable, i.e., permanently established, love has now been awoken in you for the stories of the son of Sri Vasudeva alone. In other words, your intelligence is properly situated, meaning that it is supremely expert in the aesthetic relish of rasa or bhakti rasa. Some commentary in regards to this Anuccheda. Earlier, Sri Sukha had narrated the stories of many avatars, such as Varaha, Nrsimha, and Vamana. Now, however, when Parikshit questioned him specifically about the Leelas of Krishna, Sukha declared that the king's intelligence was properly situated, samyag vyavasita. This implies that Sukha considered Krishna as superior to all the other avatars, and that his mind was fully established in him. As a result, he was able to detect a similar state of consciousness in Parikshit. So we can see some continuity of purpose, both in the hearing of Maharaj Parikshit and the narration, the chanting of Srila Sukadeva Goswami, both being most enlightened of all the dialogue, what's really nourishing them and allowing them to nourish each other's spiritual taste. Bhava is narrations directly related to the Leelas of Krishna. Jiva Goswami continues. Sukadeva's samadhi induced by remembrance of Krishna. We refer here once again to the statement of Sri Sutta Goswami, cited previously in Anuccheda 50. O Dvijas, having thus heard the extraordinary deeds of his protector, Śrī Kṛṣṇa, King Parikshit, who was entrusted to his grandfather by the Lord of the Yadavas, requested Sukadeva to relate more of the same sacred pastimes that have captivated his mind. The Anuccheda continues. Thereafter, Sri Sutta said, illustrating Sri Sukha's condition on hearing Parikshit's request for Krishna Katha. O foremost of superlative devotees, on being thus questioned by the king, Sri Sukha the son of Badarayana, was thereby reminded of the unlimited Lord, Śrī Kṛṣṇa, and the total quantum of his sense functionality was arrested by him. With great difficulty, he gradually regained external consciousness and replied to him as follows. Can you close the window? Okay. Jiva continues, "O unlimited Lord, Ananta." Here refers to Śrī Kṛṣṇa, whose complete majesty was fully manifest. Although Śrī Sukha was established in constant remembrance of him, it is said that he was reminded of him by Parikshit's inquiry simply because Śrī Kṛṣṇa is ever fresh at every moment. So Jiva is just accentuating the absorption of the speaker, Srila Sukadeva Goswami, as it has been highlighted in the words of Sutta Goswami responding. So Sutta Goswami here is relating to his audience, his observation, because he was present during this great event of Srila Sukadeva Goswami his enlightenment of Parikshit Maharaj. He was personally present, and now he's narrating that. So he's filling in he's setting the scene for his audience. This is what it was like there. And he's telling Sunaka, who's asking on behalf of all the other sages of Naimisharanya, and he's saying, he's just relating that this was quite an event, and the emotional buildup between both Srila Sukadeva Goswami and Maharaj Parikshit, especially when they enter into the narrations and the pastimes of the 10th canto, was quite extraordinary for him to observe, and he's trying to relay that to his audience at Naimisharanya. So we can see that with great difficulty, he gradually regained external consciousness and replied to him as follows. So this comes up in a few different contexts, but it's mentioned that Parikshit's son was there also. And anytime Srila Sukadeva Goswami would become so involved in his own Leela narrative that he was drawn himself into a state of internal samadhi in relishing the pastimes that he was sharing with Maharaj Parikshit, he would lose external consciousness, and the king's son would engage in a very profound kirtan at that time to bring him back to external consciousness so he could continue with the Leela narrative. Basically in deference to the time constraints that Maharaj Parikshit was under because of the curse. In 7 days, you're going to die. So Maharaj Parikshit was on a clock, and he wanted to absorb as much as he could from the rishi, from Sukadeva Goswami, before his time was up. And therefore, sometimes when a speaker would fall into samadhi, the audience may out of deference to the speaker, just allow him to continue on and maybe even depart themselves and just let him remain in his state of ecstatic trance. But in this particular instance, the deference was more to the necessity of Maharaj Parikshit, and therefore Sukadeva was always pulled back to the task at hand, his revealing to Maharaj Parikshit the Leela narrative of the Bhagavata Purāṇa. Little from the commentary here. The questions raised by Parikshit after he heard about the killing of Aghasura led Sukha to relate the wonderful pastimes of Brahma's delusion by Krishna's display of supreme majesty. At the mere mention of this Leela, Sukha was thrown into the state of samadhi, in which all external awareness was arrested. All of his senses were then drawn inward, becoming absorbed in Krishna, exactly as if he were personally present there. His internal senses being thus awoken, he could smell Krishna's bodily fragrance, hear his sweet words, and so on. According to Śrī Sanatana Gosvāmī, he was brought to external awareness again by the performance of loud kirtan accompanied by musical instruments. The word puna again indicates that such a state was aroused in Sukha time and again. Whenever this occurred, Parikshit would momentarily experience feelings of anxiety because his time was limited and there was so much more to hear. In such moments, Janamejaya, the son of Parikshit, would lead a kirtan to gently break Sukha's samadhi so that he could continue. Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī continues. Sunaka recognizes Sukadeva as a great devotee of Krishna. Again, kṛṣṇas tu Bhagavān svayam. As we go through these various verses that Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī is highlighting, we are continually brought to the point of the major Leela narratives, the major speakers, those that are sitting at their feet and hearing. They are all primarily throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam fixated on Krishna. So these are all statements in support of kṛṣṇas tu Bhagavān svayam. This is the topmost manifestation of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, after proclaiming King Parikshit as a great devotee of Bhagavān in Srimad Bhagavatam 2.3.15, Sri Sunaka describes Sukadeva as having the exact same devotional temperament as the king in the very next verse. The venerable son of Vyasa, Sri Sukha, was also fully devoted to Sri Vasudeva. Indeed, in the assembly of holy sages, there are naturally discussions of the gracious qualities of the Lord, whose praises are sung by exalted devotees. But of course, in the verse here, we see the significance of the pointing to Sri Vasudeva. The word cha also informs us that Sri Sukha had the same temperament as King Parikshit, who was described in the preceding verse. Consequently, here also the word Vasudeva must be explained as referring exclusively to Śrī Kṛṣṇa, the son of Vasudeva. Even in the assembly of other holy sages, Satam Samagame, there are discussions of the gracious qualities of Bhagavān, whose praises are sung by exalted devotees. So the conversations between these two great devotees certainly must have been predominated by the pastimes of Śrī Kṛṣṇa. This is the intended sense. So again, Jīva Gosvāmī in his Anucchedas is pointing out what is the intended sense of these other verses in the Bhagavatams. We as students of the Bhagavatam, coming in the Gaudiya Sampradaya, can see these narratives and can read these verses only and come away from that reading and hearing only with this sense of purpose, that the intent of the speaker, the intent of the hearer, the intent of Srila Vyasadeva himself in representing the Bhagavata Purāṇa was all centered on Bhagavān Śrī Kṛṣṇa. Jiva continues, what more need be said about the fact that Sri Sukadeva's ultimate aim was none other than Śrī Kṛṣṇa? The 10th and 11th cantos, which make up nearly half the book, are concerned almost exclusively with Krishna, are themselves proof of this. After concluding in brief the narrations of the other avatars in the earlier cantos, Suka greatly expanded on Krishna's glories in these two cantos. Therefore, in the very beginning of his discourse, he prayed for Krishna's mercy. This from the second canto, the beginning, near the beginning of Srila Sukadeva Goswami's narration to Maharaj Parikshit. This prayer is there. May Bhagavān, who is the husband of Shri, the goddess of beauty, the master of sacrifice, the Lord of all created beings, the ruler of all intellects, the overseer of the universes, the sustainer of the earth, the protector and refuge of the Andakas, Vrishnis, and Sattvatas, and the support of the devotees, please be gracious to me. The meaning is self-evident. Some commentary in regards to this Anuccheda. The Andakas, Vrishnis, and Sattvatas are different clans of the Yadus, in whose dynasty Krishna has made his appearance. Srimad Bhagavat has 335 chapters divided into 12 cantos. Out of these, the 10th and 11th cantos contain 121 chapters and are directly concerned with Krishna's Leela and teachings. Apart from these two cantos, there are segments of Krishna's life that are recounted here and there throughout the first and third cantos. Thus, almost half of the book is directly focused on Krishna. The remainder of the Bhagavat may be said to present only a backdrop for that component which stands out to form its main body. The narratives related to cosmic evolution and the divine appearances of yore serve only to allow Krishna's delightful human-like pastimes to be seen in the proper perspective. This central focus of the Bhagavat on Śrī Kṛṣṇa thus indicates that he alone is the ultimate aim of both its original speaker and hearer, Sri Sukadeva and Parikshit Maharaj. Going on to the 57th Anuccheda. Krishna is the sole aim of Vyasa. Next, it is shown that Śrī Kṛṣṇa is the sole aim of Sri Vyasadeva. Srila Vyasadeva also saw that the yoga of unalloyed devotion to Bhagavan who is beyond sense perception, Anuccheda, is the direct means to extinguish this misery. Knowing all this, the wise Vasudeva composed this Satvata Samhita, Srimad Bhagavatam, for the people in general who are unaware of this fact. Indeed, in the very act of receptively and attentively hearing this Srimad Bhagavat, Bhakti to Śrī Kṛṣṇa, the Supreme Person, self-manifests in a person's heart, dispelling lamentation, illusion, and fear. Self-manifests in a person's heart. So the power, the sangha that's contained in the Bhagavatam itself, being itself a literary incarnation of the Supreme Lord, and within that manifestation of the Lord, the Bhagavata Purāṇa, all of his other shaktis and energies also come into play. And all of his great devotees he doesn't come alone. Whenever Krishna manifests, he's with his eternal associates. So whether he manifests in Vraj, whether he manifests in Navadvip, or whether he manifests in the pages of the Bhagavata Purāṇa, he does not come alone. So through the association of his eternal associates, as they make themselves available to us as the narrators and hearers of the various līlas and significant spiritual instruction that's included and provided for us in the Srimad Bhagavatam, from that tremendous association, that hearing, receptive hearing, tadvadi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya, we ourselves, bhakti comes into our heart, as mentioned here in this verse. Bhakti to Śrī Kṛṣṇa, the Supreme Person, self-manifests in a person's heart, dispelling lamentation, illusion, and fear. We could, of course, go off into a discussion of inherency, but I think the words of the verse are self-evident in this regard. Jīva Gosvāmī continues, and he says, the word Anuccheda, the Lord who is beyond sense perception, refers to Śrī Kṛṣṇa, since his name is a popular epithet for Krishna, as in the following verses from the Vasudeva Mahatmya of the Paribhasa Purāṇa. Now, Jīva Gosvāmī ventures outside the Bhagavata Purāṇa for some shastric praman or evidence for the points that he is making for our spiritual benefit. The fierce demoness named Putna, who had assumed the form of a flying witch, was killed by baby Krishna while he slept in a cradle under the axle of a cart. The demoness, who was gigantic, powerful, and terrible to behold, had offered her poisoned breast to baby Janardhan, but was killed by him instead. When the residents of Vraj saw the dead witch lying there, they declared, "This boy has been born again and should therefore be called Anuccheda, he who has been awarded new life from under the axle of a cart." Paribhasa Purāṇa. Jīva continues and says in his Anuccheda, Such being the case, Vyasa uses the word Krishna directly in the second of the two Bhagavata verses quoted above. The author of Śrī Bhagavān Nama Kamudi also says, in its primary sense, Rudivriti, the word Krishna signifies the Supreme Brahman, who has a blackish complexion like the tamal tree and who suckles the breast of Yasoda. This is so because of the predominance of such usage and because such is the meaning that immediately springs to mind as soon as one hears the name Krishna being uttered. In the Sama Upanishad also, Krishna is directly referred to as the son of Devaki. The sage Agniras had imparted this metaphysical teaching unto Krishna, the son of Devaki. Here in the second Bhagavat verse quoted above, the book's fruition is said to be exclusively in Śrī Kṛṣṇa, and by his attainment alone, the Bhagavat's utter completion is accomplished. Some commentary in regards to this Anuccheda is given. Vyasa is the author of Srimad Bhagavat. Before writing this book, he sat absorbed in devotional samadhi and was granted a direct vision of the Supreme Person, Śrī Kṛṣṇa, along with his energies. Therefore, sometimes the Srimad Bhagavatam is referred to as a samadhi bhashya, or a book that came out of the samadhi of Srila Vyasadeva. The commentary continues. On the basis of this immediate experience, Vyasa composed the book. The two verses cited here are part of the description of his experience and are vital to Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī's understanding of Vyasa's intent in writing the Bhagavat. Śrī Jīva identifies Anuccheda as Śrī Kṛṣṇa and provides two reasons for this conclusion. First of all, Vyasa himself uses the word Krishna in the very next verse. Secondly, according to the description found in Paribhasa Purāṇa, Anuccheda is a name of Krishna, derived from the fact that he obtained a new life while lying under a cart by escaping Putana's poison. So we can see the interesting way that we're schooled in the logical presentation utilized by Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī, and how through that logical presentation, he brings out the fact that the terminology used by Srila Vyasadeva and the nomenclature that of identifying Anuccheda as the Supreme Personality can only be referring to Śrī Kṛṣṇa, Bhagavān Śrī Kṛṣṇa, thus supporting the Paribhasa Sutra. Others may be able to or provide a different explanation, but I can support my understanding based upon this verse from the Paribhasa Purāṇa, wherein the definition of Anuccheda specifically refers to the pastimes of baby Krishna in relationship with Putana and her trying to poison him to death. And he actually was unaffected, or he came back to life, as a different way of looking at it, and where the word Anuccheda would be most applicable. These are all very much pulling us into the various Leela narratives of Krishna. And we're going to be quite pleasantly rewarded by Jiva Goswami as he takes us step by step by the hand. He's taken us up to the point of the Paribhasa Sutra and looking at all the other avataric descents of divinity as put forth in the beginning of the Bhagavata Purāṇa. And now coming to the key for the Gaudiya understanding, the Paribhasa Sutra, and gradually schooling us thoroughly in how that Paribhasa Sutra runs through is the main support provided through the whole narration of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And fixing our mind on Krishna as he is doing now, step by step, as we come out of the Paribhasa Sutra, then he's going to introduce us more intimately to Krishna as Krishna reveals himself through the Srimad Bhagavatam. He's going to introduce us to his associates. He's going to introduce us to his places of pastime and introduce us to the narration, all so that we come away from this Krishna Sandarbha, which is the real focus of Jiva's Sambandha Gyan. The others, the Tattva Sandarbha, the Bhagavat Sandarbha, the Paramatma Sandarbha, were all laying the groundwork for upon which we could fully apprehend the significance of the original Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. And now Jiva is busy firmly establishing Krishna as he's presented in the Bhagavatam, and he's completing the task of the first 4 volumes of his Sandarbhas, which are centered on Sambandha Gyan. If we can see how all the threads of these various tattvas are woven together, and that all the Lord and all of his various energies, how they manifest themselves, then we can, with that firm grounding and that firm ground upon which we can stand in place, then he can take us into, now you can enter, let me take you into the world of bhakti. And in his next Sandarbha, he will introduce us to bhakti and firmly establish us in the abhideya that allows us to ourselves become fully qualified for the ultimate attainment. And then he also gives us that in his Priti Sandarbha. Prem Bhakti. How is that manifest in the life of a sadhika? So there's a lot going on in Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī's Sat Sandarbhas, and we're truly blessed to be able to study them and and through that, the tutoring of Jīva Gosvāmī, be able to extract the essence, which is what the word Sandarbha itself means, from the Srimad Bhagavatam. We'll continue on to the 58th Anuccheda. It may be seems some redundancy here by Jiva, but he is just pounding the post. We can look at this Paribhasa Sutra from every different angle, from all the different viewpoints of all the individual devotees in the Bhagavata Purāṇa. And we, as Gaudiyas, can easily see this entire Srimad Bhagavatam is taking us to Bhagavān Śrī Kṛṣṇa. And so Krishna is the sole aim of Narada. Next, it is shown that Śrī Kṛṣṇa is the sole aim of Śrī Narada, who informed Śrī Vyasadeva, my dear Vyas, in that place I listened each day to the enchanting stories of Krishna, mercifully sung by those sages. With each moment that I heard these narrations, with faith, love was awoken in me for Bhagavān, whose glory is most endearing. The two verses spoken by King Parikshit, beginning with 10.7.1, cited in Anuccheda 51, are also relevant in establishing that the word Krishna here refers to the son of Sri Yasoda by the principle of Shruti Samanya, which holds that a word or statement is understood from its general meaning, that meaning which automatically springs to mind on first hearing the word. So again, Jiva's saying, we can use any verse, and we can look at things in so many ways. And in this instance here, we could see we're talking about Krishna, the son of Yasoda. And we can see that by using this simplest of presentations, Shruti Samanya. What first springs to mind when you hear the word Krishna? And for Gaudiyas, the first thing that springs to mind is the Yasoda, or the son of Nanda, or the lover of Radha, or the friend of Subal. Narada repeats the word Krishna throughout the Bhagavat. In the statements of Narada in the Bhagavat, repetition of the word Krishna is also seen in verses such as the following. O Brahmana, Vyasadeva, in due course of time, the appointed moment of death appeared like a flash of lightning to me, whose mind was thus fixed on Krishna, who was devoid of attachment and whose heart was free from all taint. Elsewhere, also, Narada makes explicit contextual reference to Krishna. Indeed, you, Pandavas, are exceedingly fortunate in this world of human beings, because the sages who purify the entire world visit your home, where the Supreme Brahman himself, Śrī Kṛṣṇa, resides, disguised in human form. This very Brahman, who is the embodiment of the experience of the unadulterated bliss of liberation, sought after by highly evolved beings, is verily your beloved friend, cousin, intrinsic self, worshipable deity, obedient follower, and preceptor. May he, the master of the sattvas, whose essential form has not been directly described in truth, even by the likes of Shiva and Brahma, not even through the analytical power of their intellects, and who is worshipped by us through silence, devotion, and sense control, be gracious upon us. Then he goes to a quote from the commentary in this regard by Sridhar Swami. Swami also comments in this regard. Sri Narada spoke these 3 verses to King Yudhisthira while lamenting, alas, how great is the fortune of Prahlad, by whom the Lord was seen. We, on the other hand, have not been so fortunate. This will come to a very interesting conclusion, this Anuccheda, which continues as follows. Jiva, he writes the phrase, Manushyalingam Gudam, disguised in human form, indicates that his bodily composition includes all the characteristics, linga, such as hand and feet, that are particular to human beings, as seen in the world. This is the form, rupa, being specified, by which is meant his Sri Vigraha, or divine spiritual body. This form has not been described in truth, vastu taya, meaning that because his form is itself the supreme Brahman, it is impossible to determine what exactly this abiding substance, vastu, is. As is said in the Vishnu Sahasra Nama Stotra, his body is ineffable. Anirdeshya vapu. Because these verses confer supreme joy, they are repeated again by Narada at the end of the 7th canto. There's some extensive commentary, and then we'll mention a couple points here. The commentary, Satyanarayan Das explains as follows. There are 6 criteria, sadlinga, by which an author's intention or the essential message of a book can be assessed. One of them is known as abhashya, the repetition of the principal subject throughout the text. In this Anuccheda, Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī demonstrates that Narada repeatedly refers to only to the name of Krishna in his instructions to Vyasa and King Yudhisthira. The first verse quoted here was spoken by Sri Narada while recounting the story of his past life to Vyasa. The other 3 verses were addressed to King Yudhisthira after Narada had concluded the story of Prahlad, in which he underlined the extraordinary fortune bestowed on Prahlad by Bhagavān Nrsimha. On hearing this account, King Yudhisthira, out of humility, began to feel as though he were less fortunate than Prahlad. Sensing this, Narada proclaimed in the 3 specific verses the altogether unparalleled blessings conferred upon Yudhisthira and his brothers. Prahlad was indeed greatly fortunate because Bhagavān Nrsimha blessed him with his own direct appearance. Thus, this he did, however, only on one occasion, whereas Bhagavān Śrī Kṛṣṇa, who is referred to as the Supreme Brahman himself, used to regularly come and live with the Pandava brothers in their own home for months at a time. Moreover, he was their intimate friend and also their cousin by relation. Many illustrious sages, whose audience is extremely difficult to gain, used to flock to the capital of the Pandavas on the odd chance that they might get to see Śrī Kṛṣṇa. Consequently, the fortune of Yudhisthira and his brothers far surpassed even that of Prahlad. this brings out such a nice and sweet point that in narrating the Leela narrative of Prahlad to King Yudhisthira, Narada saw that he was feeling himself, as all devotees do, in their great humility, feeling himself less than Prahlad Maharaj. Not that he wanted to be more than Prahlad Maharaj in any material sense, but wow, Prahlad Maharaj got such blessings from Bhagavān Nrsimha, who saved him and who dispatched his demoniac father and who took him on his lap and embraced him, even to an extent that Lakshmi herself was set back by the affection that the Lord showed to Prahlad. So Narada sensed this in Yudhisthira Maharaj, that he was feeling somewhat despondent, that I've never experienced what Prahlad experienced in the way Prahlad experienced it. Maybe I'm not such a great devotee of Krishna. Maybe I'm deficient in so many ways. And sensing this, Narada immediately encourages Yudhisthira and reminds him of the significance of his and his brother's relationship with Krishna, and how Krishna even served them as a menial servant at times, and treated them as the closest of friends, and spent months living with them as a brother would live with a brother. So much so that sages would go out of their way, who were not seen hardly at all, who never left their hermitages or came down from the Himalayas, would flock to the capital of the Pandavas just to catch a glimpse of Lord Krishna. And Yudhisthira and his brothers were seeing Krishna day in and day out for months at a time. We ought to also notice this in Sukadev's narration to Parikshit Maharaj, in narrating the good fortune of certain devotees. He noticed in Parikshit some despondency and some where Maharaj Parikshit would feel himself inadequate, and then Sukadev would again have to encourage him. And we see in the narration those instances coming up repeatedly, so that the hearer, the student himself, can feel encouraged. And this is the great generosity of all the gurus, that they are always encouraging their students. The student is always feeling himself insignificant and in humility, feeling himself inadequate in so many ways. But the guru will say, no, you are also there. This is maybe for the sadhaka, what's coming out is, this is your prospect. Someday this will be your page, and the Bhagavatam will also be written. So we've spoken for some time here, and this seems a good place to cut things off for today. If anybody has a question, we can certainly entertain that. And if there are no questions, I will thank you so much for your kind association. Vanchakalpatubhyascha, kripasinabheva-cha, patitanam pamanebhyo, Vaishnavidya namo namaha. Hare Krishna. Thank you so very much.
Krishna Kirtana Ganana Tanapano Premamritam Manidhi Dhira Dhira Jana Priyau Priyakarau Nirmasaram Pujitau Śrī Chaitanya Kripa Bharau Bhubi Bhuva Bharavahantarakam Bande Rupa Sanatana Raghajagam Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī Krishna Kirtana Ganana Tanapano